The big story tonight, 2 years after that attack in El-Adde 2 years ago, 6:30 in the morning. It was early in the morning and these troops were ambushed. We're speaking about this and the aftermath and any lessons that have been learned since that attack. We're with Patrick Gadara and Byron Adera. So let's get into it. Gadara, I'd like to start with you because the whole idea of us going into Somalia was to secure the country, but yet attacks continue. What's your assessment of our operation in Somalia and whether that is bearing any fruit in this country?
Well, before I get to that, let me just respond to what something I said a bit earlier before the break. I've had the opportunity to work with AMISON for a number of years, from 2010. And I was there in Mogadishu for about 4 or 5 years. And there's nothing like being there to disabuse you of the notion of military precision. It is really a bit of an oxymoron, you know. And the fact is, what happened at El-Adde had happened before. It had happened to the Ugandans at Janale. It had happened to the Burundian contingent at Lego. Exact same MO, using Shabaab massing troops, using a vehicle-borne explosive device to breach the perimeter and going in and overrunning the camp. You know, so we knew, and all of these attacks happened immediately after rotations. One thing you've got to remember is, and AMISON, this had been pointed out to them way before, that the policy of simply rotating out troops, so you bring in entire units and you take out entire units, was not good, was not useful. You know, it created vulnerabilities. Yet Kenya went in, knowing this had happened. We didn't seem to take any lessons from that to protect our own troops, you know, and we retained that, and we got hit. It's not a surprise, you know. So my point is, we need to hold people to account. When Byron says that we should give them benefit of doubt, I really don't think we should. We gave them benefit of doubt after Westgate. What have we heard about Westgate in the last 5 years? You know, there has been nothing. Nobody has come out to own up and say this is what went wrong and here are the people being held to account. There is nothing. The moment we don't hold them to account, they will run away. They will escape. It is the silence, the numbers and everything are not being hidden from al-Shabaab. Al-Shabaab know how many people they killed. They're the ones who killed them. They're being hidden from the public. Because what they're trying to avoid here is accountability, is us insisting on people being punished for failing to carry out their duty and to do their jobs. Now, to your question on my assessment of how it's going since we went in 2011, well, I think our incursion has been a pretty bad failure. We went in, and don't forget, initially we didn't go in as AMISON, we went in unilaterally with a certain set of objectives. We were going to recover people who had been kidnapped. Yes. We were going to create buffer zones, you know, etc. None of this was achieved. You know, Linda Inchi failed ended without ever achieving any of the objectives that government itself has stated were there. And then if you ask about the numbers of attacks that have happened to us, 90% of attacks on Kenya, terror attacks, have happened after we went into Somalia. You know, so again, our incursion hasn't made us any safer. You know, and I think it's time we actually sat down, because one of the things that's been lacking is we've never had a proper public debate about why we went in and why we should stay there. So let's have a proper discussion. You know, what are our goals? What are our aims over there?
And how are we doing in there? Byron, should we be having a very public conversation on our objectives in Somalia? And do you think that those objectives have been met?
I think that is the requisite of every organization that is welcomes ideas, fresh ideas. They say if you do have a fortress mentality, the danger is you may be closed in, and you eventually start to suffer from what Barbara Tuchman in her journal, The Folly of the Kings, mentioned in what she called a wooden-headedness. It's a fixation on a preconceived opinion, and that with the total or overconfidence in the same, that prevents you from being flexible and adaptable to things that are maybe flying on your side and you may be blind to. And I think public participation, people critiquing what the army is doing, and of course, even at the personal level, should be welcome. And like I said before, they should take every kind of report with a pinch of salt.
Right.
Because the citizenry, as much as everyone else should be concerned rationally, are the main beneficiaries of security and safety. But that's not to downplay the efforts that have been made to make sure that the originally set goals and objectives in the overall counterterrorism strategy isn't at all working. I can draw parallels with several other even countries that have more like classical militaries across the world. The US, the UK, Germany. We've had terror attacks in those spaces and in those countries. What we have got to realize is that terrorism as a threat isn't conventional in nature. The creation of buffer zones would apply more to a conventional force that as a war front, and basically you can, lay language, push them beyond a certain point and get.
So then, knowing, what we're dealing with, and that this is not conventional warfare, if you like. And allow me to be simplistic, this is not pitched battle where we agree we will meet at high noon tomorrow and, so what should our strategy be?
Absolutely.
Obviously nothing conventional.
Our strategy is not without the consideration of other playing factors. Like I said, the AMISON is all formed and by lots of other forces coming together. You've got several countries that are coming together to ensure that they push a common agenda. That is very simplistic.
But do we have a common agenda?
The common agenda
Somalia?
is to defeat...
AMISON has all of these other forces, as everything that's happening in the Middle East. Do we have a common agenda?
Yes, absolutely. If you consider the commonness of that agenda, in it are several, a confusion of factors. And that is what, if you may, or if you would allow me to say, is one of the breakdowns that are bringing about some of these failures, not all, but some of these failures. If you are to consider El-Adde in question, maybe within the Kenyan sector, but neighboring to that particular sector, maybe occupational forces that are not necessarily Kenyan forces. And nowhere else is the power of what we call in military quarters mutual support playing more profoundly than in the configuration of the forces in terms of employment and deployment. So that, mainly what mutual support would actually guarantee is that any attack on one of those forces within the battle space will inadvertently invite a ferocious counterattack on the attacker. Now, these failed, but you cannot again look at this with only the Kenyan forces in consideration. Maybe the nearest and the neighboring force that was may have been in the best position to respond at that particular point in time was bogged down by other issues. Talk about the hierarchical kind of,
sorry, when you refer to the forces that were nearby,
yes,
perhaps the Somali National Force, because we understand
absolutely
they knew what was going on. They had evacuated their camp. There was nobody, even in the surrounding villages. They all knew something was coming, but us.
Okay, it would be nearly as comical as it can get if I were to consider the desertion by the Somali National Army of the defensive position to be something that it can be imagined to maybe in other quarters informed the KDF to maybe leave their camps, but that's laughable. If anything, we should criticize the fact that the SNA basically deserted their camp. But the bravery and the gallantry of the El-Adde men, the Kenyan men at El-Adde, who stood their ground to fight, should actually be a happy point for us.
All right. Okay,
that is in line with the mutual support that I was talking about. This is what you'd have expected in a classical kind of outplay. Yeah. Like the Somali national government, the SNA having gotten information that this was going to go down, they ought to have shared this information, and I hope that they did. Okay. And with the trust in the mutual support, the El-Adde team expected them to stay put and do their job. So,
all right, but then let me bring in Gadara, because then doesn't that say something about our troops there? Clearly have not won the support and the trust of the Somali National Army?
Yes, well, they haven't, actually. Two quick things. First, when it comes to, when you look at what happened with the SNA deserting their camps, I mean, there is, we have had reports that Kenyans were actually warned. In fact, just yesterday, you had a newspaper report on The Nation where some of the soldiers that subsequently came out of El-Adde were saying that their seniors knew this attack was going to happen. You know, so we can't hide behind, oh, they were caught by surprise, etc. And actually, we shouldn't really call it an ambush. It's a camp, you know. It is expected that camps will be attacked. That's why you defend them, you know. So it's not, you're not really being ambushed, you know, over here.
Okay.
The second thing is, going back to your question about what it says about our mission there. The fact is, when we went into Somalia, right now we like to paint it with this war and terror rubric, which I really don't agree. What was happening inside Somalia was an internal conflict that had many aspects to it. The terrorism was just one. When I was in Mogadishu in 2010, the fighting was house to house. Actually, the goal of al-Shabaab was to kick out the then transitional federal government and to take over the country. You know, this, and then we also have clan dynamics that play into this. So places like Kismayu were contested. There's a number of big clans that are contesting Kismayu, and we went in and imposed a winner. You know. And we didn't understand that by doing this, we are becoming participants in that conflict. That is why other people from other clans stop seeing us as, oh, these are peacekeepers or whatever. Yeah. Yeah. These are actually combatants, you know. And that's why...
So you're saying we went in and we picked a side?
We picked a side.
Okay, fine.
And the thing is, we didn't seem to act like we realized that we were picking sides, that we were making ourselves targets by doing this. So we go and situate a camp, you know, in a hostile area, and we are surprised that the people around there don't come and warn us.
All right.
You know?
Okay, all right. We have 2 minutes to go on the show. So I want to ask very quickly, a minute from each of you. There's a drawdown that's planned by 2020 of AMISON. Do you think we're safe? Do you think we should stay on? After all, we went in by ourselves before we were rehatted under AMISON. But what do you think of the drawdown by 2020? That's in 2 years. Will Somalia be secure? I'll start with you, Byron. What are your thoughts on that? Okay,
I'd like to very quickly mention that I do not agree with Gadara's sentiments that we went into Somalia and picked sides, and that's why we had you know, an influx of terror attacks. If anything, these incidents started way earlier, before KDF actually got involved. And for sure, we had attacks, you know, in the high seas, you know, the kind of piracy that was happening that affected directly the interests of the Kenyans. We had people being taken hostage in Kenya that finally sank the last nail in the coffin. And for certain, war fighting is actually something that will be partisan at the end of the day. What should be looked at more critically is the way we'd win the hearts and minds of the people and keep every other you know, non-partisan people. So in terms of the response competition, so the non-aggressive kind of approaches to ensure that the al-Shabaab are milk dry of their sources of recruits or new entrants into the force. That is something I think the army or the armies as AMISON under that umbrella have got to be very critical about. In terms of the withdrawal, I think it will depend on a couple of factors. One of them is if the mission will have been achieved at the end of the day, and within that there are several subsets of topics to be you know, dug deeper and thought harder about. But for sure, insecurity anywhere on earth, and especially that's being brought about by acts of terror, is insecurity everywhere. Kenya has got to be awake to the fact that the peace and the security that we enjoy now, however much we'd want to criticize the efforts, is because there's some effort that is geared towards making sure that we are safe within the border. So, and everybody's a participant. It's really sad to have had a look at what the conversations that went on in social media, especially when we had the post-poll kind of chaos, and when some policemen were actually killed by the al-Shabaab, and you have the populace actually weighing in and saying and congratulating the al-Shabaab. That is something that should be strongly you know, rebuked in the strongest sense of that word. And we need to be patriotic as it should be and behind our own sons and daughters that are across the borders doing a good job.
Okay, Patrick, 1 minute. What options do we have? I know.
Okay, very quickly. First, Byron should know that 90% of attacks happened after we went in, not before. The second thing is our incursion had nothing to do with piracy. Piracy wasn't happening in the lower areas where we put our troops. So we want the guys who stopped it. So actually when they started putting armed people on ships, that actually that stopped it. And when they deployed a whole armada of ships from different countries on the coast of Somalia. What options do we have? Well, the first option we have is to actually have a discussion about what we are doing in Somalia. You know, I think we need very urgently to have a proper public debate about what our goals are there. And I think any withdrawal should be conditioned, you know, on whether these objectives are being achieved. I think we should be asking when our representatives go to Addis for the meetings of the AU Peace Security Council, you know, do they simply take what they're being told, or do we have a position when it comes to the withdrawal? What are the conditions that should inform that withdrawal? What are our conditions that we want? We haven't had a discussion on this. Okay. And I think a lot of this is because we simply act as if we don't know what we're doing there. Right. When you have the army essentially trading charcoal and sugar and making money for al-Shabaab, don't forget, al-Shabaab made more money after we took Ismail than before. You know, so we need to actually go back and sit down and put down what are our objectives, what do we want, and then any withdrawal should be informed of whether those are actually being met. Okay, all right, that's a good place to leave it, sadly. We could do this for another hour or so, but that's all the time we have for now. Thank you very much. I appreciate your insights. 2 years on after El-Adde. What lessons have we learned? That is a debate we will continue to have. Patrick Adar, thank you very much, journalist, as well as Byron Adair, who's an ex-Special Forces gentleman. I thank you for your time today. This is The Big Story on this 15th day of January 2018. Thanks for watching. I'm Yvonne Okwara Matole. Up next, Ben Kitili for the news of the day on KTN Prime. Good night.